Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. On today's show, you're going to learn how to overcome something that lurks deep down in all of us, fear. I'm honored to be joined by my friend and resident brainiac, Dr. Srini Pillay. Srini is the award-winning author of Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear. This show gets deep, but if you want any hope of taming your squirrel brain, this one is definitely for you. By the way, if you're interested in brain science, neuroscience, or music, you might want to check out my first best-selling book called The Musical Brain. I'll warn you in advance, it's quite technical as it's based on some of the brain and neuroscience research I did while studying at Dartmouth. But if you want to know why music exists, where it came from, or what music does to our brains, check it out. Just look for Abel James and the Musical Brain on Amazon.com. Now, here's a bit of inspiration I'd like to share with you from a member of our online community, the Fat Burning Tribe. This message is from Matthew in Arizona. He says, "Great news. Since my first body composition was done 6 weeks ago, I've lost 13 pounds of fat and gained 1.5 pounds of muscle. Thanks, Abel James, for making the wild diet so easy to follow and for making the recipe so delicious that I'd rather cook than eat out." Matthew, congratulations. Cooking at home instead of eating out is a huge step in upgrading your health and certainly your body composition for many years to come. In fact, cooking at home, learning how to prepare your own food for yourself as well as your family is probably the number one thing you can do for your health long term. So props to you for that. Now, if you want to know step by step what to eat for the next 7 days to drop fat, get fit, and feel great, listen up. All you have to do is visit fatburningman.com and enter your best email address, and I'll send you a Quickstart guide to the wild diet with a 7-day meal plan to get you fit as a fiddle right away. Just visit fatburningman.com and you can get our quick start guide to the wild diet right now for free. All right, on to the show with Dr. Srini. You're about to learn how to reframe negative thought patterns, how to overcome anxiety and achieve your goals, why we fear success, why we don't always do what we know we want to do, and much more. All right, let's go hang out with the doc. All right, folks, I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Srini Pillay, who's a certified master executive coach, brain imaging researcher, and assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He has 17 years of experience in neuroscience research and is regarded as a pioneer in the field of neurocoaching. Dr. Pillay, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, I've been meaning to have you on the show for a while because we've rubbed shoulders quite a few times. And I was just rereading your book, Life Unlocked, and I'd forgotten about how wonderful of a writer you are.
Thank you.
You know, I've read a lot of brain science-y type books because that's one of the things I just totally geek out on. And this one is very artful. It really is. And you explain things that seem counterintuitive in a way that totally makes sense. So why don't we start with one of them, which is all around fear of success. Because I know a lot of people who are listening to this show, they're kind of overachievers in their own way. And a lot of times they'll kind of set goals, but you're afraid of them at the same time. You might not even realize it because one of the things you talk about is unconscious fear. So can you just rap about that a little bit?
Sure. So, yeah, I think sometimes people think I'm being a little too optimistic about this, but I feel like, having been a doctor for 25 years, I feel like I maybe you should consider what I'm about to say, which is that I think that in every human being, there is some special capacity that is waiting to be activated. Mm-hmm. And I think the extent to which it is activated depends to a large extent, not just on your willingness to be the greatness that you are, but also your willingness to take a risk and have the courage to reach for what you want. So one of the things we know is that when you make a decision about moving forward, say you want to make more money, or say you want to have a much better life, and let's say you want to actually sort of change jobs or ask for a different kind of position, what a lot of people do is they think about it and then procrastinate about it, and the fear gets in the way of actually making that decision. And that's because fear activates the amygdala, which is the anxiety processing center in the brain. And because the anxiety center is connected to the thinking brain, it disrupts the way you make judgments about what you want to do. So what we know is that this fear can impact the amygdala or the anxiety center, even when you're not aware of it. So a lot of people will say, hey, I'm not afraid of anything. Like, I want it all. Like, I want to have the success they want. Yet at the back of their minds are these questions like, does this mean I'm going to have to work more? Does this mean that people are going to want more from me? Does it mean that I might actually have to fail? Does it mean that people are going to make fun of me when I do fail? These are all unconscious questions that start affecting your level of fear and anxiety. And it also affects the information that's going to your brain's GPS. Now, to get to your goal, it's a bit like driving to your goal. Your brain drives you to your goal, and it uses the GPS that's in a part of the brain called the posterior parietal cortex. And again, I just want to say as a caveat, a lot of what I'm saying is oversimplified, but is generally true and borne out by the research.
Yeah.
So when this part of your brain actually activates, what happens is it collects information. So if you're giving your brain messages like success is possible, like it doesn't matter if I have the fear, I'm going to do it anyway, or I don't mind if people see me fail, I mind more if I don't reach for my goals. When you say that, your GPS collects the information and your brain starts working on a plan to get you to your goal, both consciously or unconsciously. If, however, you find that you are giving these double messages to your brain. So, imagine if I always say to people, first of all, I'm crazy about the brain. I love it. And so I like to personify what it does. So I say, well, imagine you have a brain in your skull and your brain so picks up the phone and is listening to you. And you're saying, hey, I want to reach like the top of my game. Your brain is like, okay, cool. I'm going to try to figure this out. I'm going to contact everything in the unconscious, get a plan together, and help you get successful. If, however, your brain then starts having the switchboard ringing off the hook, where it's like getting other messages like, but what if you fail? But what if people lie to you? Eventually your brain's like, hey, hold on. This may not be a good plan. I don't want to go forward. And if it's unconscious, you're not going to know that you're sending these messages to your brain. So the first overarching fact is that when you have fear of success, whether it's conscious or unconscious, a lot of times these double messages confuse the brain.
Right.
And so the thing that we need to do is really try to connect with what might be in the way of reaching our greatest success. So there's a concept called self-handicapping, for example, which is when people lower the bar so that they don't have to get what they want and they don't have to fail in the process. So they would rather not fail than get what they want. And I think anybody who's successful would say to you that successful people fail much more often than unsuccessful people because they take more chances. So what I would want to say to people listening to this is ask yourself first, what's your real goal? What's your stretch goal? What's your highest goal? Whether it's what you want to eat, whether it's getting more money, is there something that you want to do to change your life? Write down your stretch goal and then try to look at what might be one or two things that come up for you, like what if I fail or what if people laugh at me, and consciously feed back to yourself, that's going to suck, I'm not going to like it, but I don't care, because what I really want is I want to make sure that I am determined and I stay true to my goal so that I can reach there. And what that does is it actually, and there are different ways in which you can interact with your brain's anxiety center to calm it down. You can reframe goals, for example. You can basically, and extensive studies now show that if you provide the proper reframe to yourself, your brain's anxiety center can actually turn down. So rather than saying, I'm freaked out that people are going to laugh at me, you say, winners fail more than losers. And I want to be a winner, so I expect to fail. And immediately, that's a different reframe for your brain. Your amygdala doesn't freak out. And people will sometimes say to me, really, does this stuff work? Like, do we have actual scientific data to show that how you talk to yourself matters? I would say yes. It's not just what you're thinking as a reframe, but studies are now showing that self-talk can change brain blood flow. It can take this excessive brain blood flow in the anxiety center and send it back to the thinking brain. So for example, you can, studies now look at things like when you self-talk and you say, I'm going to crush this. Like when sports players do that, tennis players going back to the baseline, and they're saying, I'm going to crush it. The studies now show that it's much more effective if you speak to yourself in the second person out loud. If you say, you're going to crush it. And if you say you're going to crush it, you're much more likely to de-stress and boost your confidence. So, don't be shy about speaking to yourself. You can actually speak to yourself. You can change brain blood flow in the process. And one potent technique to do this when it comes to reducing fear of success is reframing some of the fears that are holding you back.
Yeah. Now, does it have to be aloud, or you can do this, during meditation in your own head? How does that work?
You can do it either way. So you can if you do it out loud, you will get an effect in your brain. Mm-hmm. And so I recommend to people actually practicing it out loud, partly because you want to override and create new pathways. So the more that you can repeat this, the better, because your habit pathways generally become like a habit hell. Yeah. And so they keep on activating, and they become sort of the go-to circuits in your brain. And you want to change the go-to circuits in your brain. And so the more you can repeat this out loud, or, if it's not possible, then just in your thoughts, the more likely you are to create these new pathways that you can turn to.
Right. And there's a wonderful moment in your book where you talk about some advice that your father gave you when you were sprinting. And you made it, even though you were fast and you were doing very well, you kept finishing second. So what happened? Because I think that's a great metaphor for what a lot of people do.
Yeah. One of the things he said to me was every time I watch you running, you run, you're ahead. And then just before you hit the finish line, you turn around to see what's going on with other people. And I realized when he said that what that did was it took me out of my element and out of my maximum speed. And it was a great metaphor for me in life overall, because I realized that a lot of times to get the real orientation you want in the world, you can actually do this simply by paying attention to your full power and strength and moving forward like that and putting all your energy in the present rather than looking over your shoulder to see what else is happening. A classic thing that I would ask people to do is if you go to YouTube and you look up Roger Federer slow motion, you pay attention to what happens when you look at his eye and where it goes when he's hitting a stroke. He's like, a dancing tennis player, and he's amazing at executing shots accurately. But if you look at what he's doing, he never looks at where he wants to hit the ball. He only ever looks at the ball as it's coming to him. And so a lot of times when you take your eye off the goal, and when you take your eye off the goal, but put it in the moment, when in that moment, for example, when I was running, rather than looking forward and looking back, if I was just in my full power, and if I trusted that my brain can maintain the image of the goal, the likelihood that I would have won would have been greater. So I think lesson number one is the more you stay grounded in yourself, the better. And lesson number two is that your brain is capable of holding on to images of your goals. So you practice that outside of when you're in your life, and then just try to be in the moment as much as you can to give yourself access to your greatest power as you're trying to reach your goal.
Yeah. And so you focused on the finish line, breaking through the tape, right? As opposed to looking over your shoulder. There's actually physiology that shows why that works too, right?
Right. And actually sort of internalizing the image of the finish line so that rather than just using my brain energy to think about, at that point you don't really want to be thinking. You want to let your unconscious and your practice take over. So what you want to do is just realize that the finish line's internalized and you can give the full power to your motor energy at that point.
Now, one of the other things that you talk about that I think is so fascinating is the problems of success once you get there. You mentioned, CEOs feeling very lonely in their corner office. People who succeed, all of a sudden it's empty up there. It's lonely. I think a lot of people, especially who are listening to this, may have already experienced something like that, especially if you're out of shape, you're unhealthy, you're sick or whatever. You assume that all of your problems will be solved when you get to this X on the map, when you get to this ultimate goal, when you achieve success. But it doesn't always work like that once you get there, does it?
It doesn't, no, because it's at some level, the human brain is wired precariously. There's a way in which I think we feel good about success, but we're also afraid of what success will bring, because with success comes increased scrutiny. It comes people being more critical of you. There's a concept known as Schadenfreude, which is basically the desire to watch people fall from grace. And a lot of recent studies are showing that human beings often are wired to want that from other people when they're competitive. So when you're at the top of your game, the people who are competing with you or the people who are jealous of you will threaten that feeling of being at the top of your game. And I think a lot of people settle for mediocrity because they're afraid to face what that is. So one of the things I think that happens commonly with people like CEOs is that there's a syndrome known as the summit syndrome, which is basically when CEOs reach the height of their game. They've been pressing on the gas and they're accelerating to the top, and they're pressing on the gas and they're accelerating to the top, and then they press on the gas and they're like, wait a minute, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And that fear of not having the power to get to the next level causes them to get really confused, afraid, become disorganized, and then they start to want to destroy what's happening around them. So rather than doing that, one of the things is to expect that for everyone's trajectory, there often is a flat point. You rise and then there's a flat point, and you rise and there's a flat point. Anyone who's involved in peak performance will tell you that it's not just like one big upward movement. It's sort of like it's upward and then you plateau, upward, you plateau. So first thing is don't freak out at the plateau. And the second thing is when the plateau is there, ask yourself, do you really need to do more of the same? Or to reach to your greatest, is there something different that you have to do?
Yeah.
So, in the case of CEOs, for example, it might have been amazing managers. They might have been really good at giving people tasks to do. But when it comes to having a vision and a mission and motivating yourself with that vision and a mission, it's very different from saying go do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And so in that case, you might think you're trying to get the job done by telling people what to do, when in fact, what you need to do is let those other people do that. And then you drive the process with your mission and your vision. And that's an example of how you can create acceleration through a different process rather than doing more of the same.
Right. So one of the problems is that people don't anticipate that leveling off, that plateau in no matter what it is. And a lot of times it's tempting to stop doing what got you there. Right.
Right.
What is that all about? And what can we do to improve that within our own habits?
So I think the first thing is to really, it's a couple of different things. I think that studies are increasingly showing that when you say things like, I have a goal, people often concentrate on the goal, right? But if you think about it, in terms of sort of most companies, only 30% of strategies are successfully executed. And of those that are, most are too slow. And this has been shown in a series of case studies by Jocelyn Davis and colleagues in a book called Strategic Speed. And so if we know that this is happening, these are like very smart people who are executing on a strategy that sounds really simple, that has a stepwise process, but something's not happening. One of the things that brain science teaches us is that goals are not what we think they are. And there are a couple of different things that I think I can point out here. One is there's a theory called selfish goal theory, which is essentially that a goal, so let's say you have a certain financial target of X, that is represented in your brain as a neural circuit. But with that same goal is, I might need to get engaged. I might need to figure out how to send my kids to college. I really need a break. I really need to start working out. There's like a ton of different goals competing with each other. And the selfish goal theory basically states that because goals are neural circuits, they don't really care about your overall well-being. They just care about getting to the finish line first.
Right.
So whichever goal you feed is the one that that's gonna get to the finish line first. So one of the things we want to think about when we're not reaching our goals is, or when we're not doing something, is to say, am I just not feeding my, am I overfeeding one goal and not feeding the other goal? And how do I address this unconsciously?
Yeah.
The second thing is that I think a lot of people, I guess there's a lot to say about this. But the second thing is that when it comes to motivation to reach your goal, because you somehow, like, as you said, pulling back, or you're not doing what you used to be doing, what studies now show is that it's not a question of carrot or stick. It's not like I'm going to motivate myself by telling myself I've got to get to this goal, and it doesn't really do it for the brain. In order to work smarter and not just harder, you actually have to ask yourself three fundamental questions. One is, what is the value of this goal to me for real? Like, what do I actually care about it? And I think I myself have found myself from time to time doing things that I'm like, wait a minute, like I don't even care about this. Like, why am I doing this?
So it needs to be emotionally relevant, right? Not someone else's goal, but one that you truly care about.
Exactly. And then the second question you want to ask yourself is, how truthful am I being about this goal? Because a lot of times people will tell you, hey, do that, that's great. And you listen to people and you do stuff, but you're not doing something that's true, something that feels real to you. So not just relevant for you, but real. And the third is to ask yourself, are there any conflicts that you have that could be holding you back? Because when you resolve those three questions, motivation works much more fluently in the brain. The third thing I think it's something that I've seen a lot in my practice, and it's something that I would really recommend that people think about, is that when you say, I want to reach my goal, the thing that matters is not just the goal, it's also the I part. Who are you to yourself? And the brain's long-term memory system, the hippocampus, has images of ourselves that's stored in it, like when you were fatter, like when you were not successful, like when you were successful. There are all these different images that come together in the gallery of your mind. And so the image that is most prominent in the gallery will often influence whether you get to that goal or not. And so one of the things an exercise that I sometimes walk people through is what I call recurating the museum of your mind. If you go into the pictures of your mind and you say, what are the three dominant pictures of myself that are probably influencing how I get to my goal? Which ones do I need to throw out? And which ones do I need to reframe and put in priority position? And that's, I think, a really good thing, because if people could even now, as they're listening to this, take out a piece of paper and a pen and write down, what do I actually think of myself? And, and just be brutally honest with yourself. Like, what are the three images? Like, it could be anything. It could be the breakup that was heartbreaking, that made you really feel like a loser, that you thought you got over, but something in you made you feel like, I'm not sure if I can make it in that domain in life, or the promotion that you didn't get, or the fact that when you were around your group of friends recently, you realized that everybody else was being so successful and you felt less than. If you carry the picture of less than in your brain, then that's who's going to be executing on the goal. And so when your memory pulls up the less than version of yourself, it's unfair to expect that version is going to be able to get you to your goal.
Yeah.
So and this all sounds sort of just metaphorical, but it's actually, there's a lot of data to suggest that the memories that we store in our brains are really do determine the extent to which we can be integrated enough to have the most powerful identity possible that's real for who we are, to take us to our goals.
Now, if you talk about this in the true, literal, visceral sense, I know an example that happens very often is people especially will gain a bunch of weight, then they'll find out that there is a way to turn that around. You can eat differently, you can exercise differently, you can change your life or what have you. You can lose a colossal amount of weight. And one thing that I see very often is people will lose 80, 100 plus pounds, and people might be telling them when they see them, wow, you look great, you look so different. I'll be like, I feel the same. I still feel the same. And then over the course of time, the weight comes back on. That happens 95% of the time, right? What is something that you can do when you look in the mirror, perhaps, to say, okay, this is different. This is the new me. I want to stay here.
I think a number of things. So firstly, I would say that in the brain, there are two kinds of intentions that play a role. One is called a goal intention, which is, I want to lose weight, which it's hard for the brain to grasp. The other is called an implementation intention, which is, I want to lose 30 pounds in 3 months and want to look like this. So your brain has a really good image of what you want. The clearer you are with your intention, the more likely it is your brain's going to carry this out. And a lot of studies now show that refined implementation intentions are much more likely to get you to your goals. All that means is spell it out, write a number, write a date, and use that as your guideline. But to get to the deeper part of your question, I think a big part of it is really speaking honestly with yourself about the different things that are in your way. So for example, I always find people are always like, how do you use this brain science to interact with your work? Well, when I use it in my work and in my brain science and in the psychology part of my life and in the corporate coaching part, I use it in a pretty literal way, and I find it really helpful. But when it comes to things like working out and things like what you eat, I love food, and I love a lot of foods that you're not supposed to eat.
Yeah.
So, so a lot of like so when I, so recently I re-engaged a trainer of mine, because I just had intuitively just felt, I think I got the best results with him. And I think it was because there was a connection, and I think he got something about how I was. So the first thing is, I think it can really help if you're working out with someone you're emotionally connected to, or someone you trust. I think the second thing is, when I sat down with him, I was like, okay, listen, I want to be in much better shape. I have no doubt about that. I want to be able to walk properly and breathe. Like these are like my top priorities. but I also, I'm not gonna just like give up my lifestyle. I'm not gonna eat like he eats, like white meat, like chicken the whole day with salad. And I'm like, I like bratwurst, I like bacon, so I'm like, how am I gonna integrate all this stuff? And he's like, well, you can keep on eating like that, but if your diet is bratwurst, bacon, and frosting, you're probably not going to be able to get to your goal. So I was like, well, can we talk about this in a way that doesn't feel like it's such a massive shift in my identity that it's going to threaten everything? Like, there's no way I could go to my friends currently and be like, I've decided I'm on an all salad diet, no bratwurst for me, thank you, I don't eat bacon anymore. Like, it's the threat to me is not just the diet threat, it's also the social threat.
Sure,
because
of course.
For me, the people I'm drawn to, somehow indirectly that's related to that. So part of what I thought, what I said to him was, this is going to take a little longer time, but I want you to know I am committed to losing weight. Now I want you to spar with me about what the options are, because I want to get real about certain changes that I can make. And I think that it's said so often, but I really think that the best feedback you can give yourself is the feedback of working out, realizing that you can actually move and breathe more effectively, that your life is coming back to you in a certain way. And that when you lose that extra weight, it's not just about how you look. It's not just about, being healthier in theory. It's about the fact that life actually opens up to you in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think the more deeply you can connect with that motivation, and for different people, it's different things, right? For some people, it's the real motivation for losing weight is that they want to see their grandchildren.
Sure.
For some people, they just want to look hot. For some people, they're like, I like it when I can move better, when I have greater mobility. And so I think if you can really connect most truthfully with what you want, and then realize that you can tinker with this process, that you can go forward, come back a little bit, say, well, maybe I can, cut back the amount of that I'm eating. Or maybe frosting is overdoing it. And my life's not really dependent on frosting. If I had to choose that and bratwurst, I'd probably choose bratwurst. And then it's like, well, but when are you eating the bratwurst? So this is not a conventional diet, because it's not like I'm going to pick this up immediately.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of behavioral change, what I've seen is the initial resistance is, this is going to threaten my identity. And I can speak to that, because I feel like my identity revolves around good food and people I eat good food with. But I think the more you can do that, and the more you can talk to your friends about it, the more you will realize that everybody kind of wants to live longer, and everybody wants to be healthy, and everybody wants to do a little bit of something to get better. So small steps. So firstly, deep look at identity. Secondly, small steps. Thirdly, get the help of someone you truly trust who understands what you're saying. And the fourth thing, which I think it takes a long time to learn, is it's not going to change if you don't change anything.
Yeah.
Like, I think for a long time, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to work out. I'll do a little bit more cardio. And then I was like, this cardio, for so much work, it's not doing anything to my belly. There's nothing. And I was like, what's going on with this cardio thing? I'm killing myself. And at the end of that, I'm like, start doing it. It's like, well, because your diet is exactly the same. So I think there is a hard reality to this, which is that you have to change something. And I think choose the things that are easiest to change first, and then gradually you'll get to a point where there are things that you might not have been willing to change initially that you will eventually change. So it's not rocket science from my perspective, but I think it is a deep engagement with the real issue of why it is you want to lose weight, and with the real issue of how you're going to do it on your own terms, with the proviso that something's got to change. You just have to figure out what's the best change for you.
Yeah. Now, along those lines, you often also will see people, have great success. They look tons better. You see them, say it's a friend or a family member or whatever, and they really look the best ever. And then self-sabotage kicks in, and then they go back to whatever they came from, right? What is that agent of self-sabotage? Can you help explain it from the perspective of the brain? Why does that happen so commonly to so many of us?
Well, yeah, self-sabotage is a real big issue. It's something that I think we all need to take a look at for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, the way you phrase your goals matters. So there's been an extensive body of research that shows if you tell yourself not to do something, your brain under conditions of stress will do the exact opposite. Like, for example, I was with my trainer, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to write down what I eat this week, and I know what I'm not going to eat. It was like the worst diet week of the entire year.
Yeah.
Because I kept on being like, I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to eat it. And then I was like, forget it. I'm going to eat that.
Yeah. And
so the first thing is, if you frame things in the negative, your brain will rebound and you will actually do the opposite of what you want under stress. So rather than saying, I will not eat potatoes, what you'll say is, I will eat 2 helpings of meat, or I will have X amount of potatoes if you want that, rather than I will not. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a concept known as repetition compulsion, which is basically, I think a lot of people, so a bunch of psychologists were standing around sort of historically. You can imagine how sort of amusing it looked when they were like watching kids and how they were behaving in a cot. And they were like, this is like a weird behavior. Like, no one's ever thought about this, but the child has a toy, which is presumably something that it wants. And you say, now the child throws the toy out. Already that's a strange behavior, because you're like, why would you throw out something that you want? And I'm going to ask people, remember, this is a pattern that sort of extends into adulthood. Then the second thing the child does is cries about it. Then the psychologists are like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
You threw the toy out. Now you're crying about it. And then the mother brings the toy back. And then the child gets really happy about it. And then the mother turns around and the child throws the toy out again. So they're like, okay, none of this behavior makes sense. I don't understand. It's your toy. You threw it out. Then you cried about it. Then you got it back. You were happy and you threw it out again. And one of the more disturbing realizations about this was that as adults, we tend to fall into that same pattern because the human brain is wired by default to gain mastery over disappointment rather than to seek fulfillment. So a lot of times we want to be really good at the fact that life sucks. We're like, life sucks, and I want to be like the best survivor in the world rather than someone who thrives. And so you've got to shift your brain's flashlight from survival behaviors into thriving behaviors. You have to ask yourself, how do I grow in the way that I want to grow rather than deal with the difficulties that life's throwing at me? Because you can get addicted to dealing with difficulties. You can become really good at it. Like, you see a lot of people who are amazing. They're really, they're very resilient, but they don't go anywhere in their lives. And that's because they're not setting thriving goals. So I think my recommendation there would be to set thriving goals and to recognize that life is not just about mastering disappointment. It's also about seeking fulfillment.
Yeah. Now, fulfillment is an interesting one because, you talk about if you want to be truly healthy or whatever, and you're eating salad and chicken every day, that doesn't sound very fulfilling. It sounds like that's at odds with the way that you actually want to live your life. But I think it's very rare that people actually write down their goals or think about success or a fulfilling life in that way. So how do you eat your bacon and your frosting and have health at the same time?
Right. Well, when you figure that out, you'll let me know.
I got the bacon part covered.
Right. So I think a lot of it is really being willing to go overboard, but also being willing to come back. And being willing to say, like I was joking with you earlier when people ask me, I used to direct the anxiety service, like, well, how do you manage your anxiety? But, sometimes I meditate, sometimes I have martinis. And they're like, it's not traditional medical advice. So they're like, what are you talking about? Alcohol is
I can
bad.
vouch for the martini part. We've enjoyed a few.
Yeah. So, and my whole feeling is that there are other things that matter to me. Like, I find it interesting. I actually geek out about when I'm drunk. There's so much stuff that you discover about yourself. I think anyone who's been drunk knows that feeling of shame and guilt when you're over the edge that you want to be and the next day. And if you surround yourself by a group of loving people, you will begin to understand things about your own consciousness, as long as you don't just keep on doing that every day.
Yeah.
And as long as you understand when you want to be moderate and when you don't want to be moderate. Because life as a constant state of moderation, I think would put me out to sleep. I wouldn't be able to live like that. You know, so I like to work hard, I like to play hard, but I really do like both. And I mess up all the time. Sometimes I work too hard, sometimes I play too hard. And so I think through all my years of practice, the most successful people have realized that they've engaged life passionately, but that they do mess up and that it is correctable. And the most important thing, and I do think you've actually mastered the whole bacon thing, is that you can change your brain and you can change the way you make decisions about what you eat, right? I mean, you're living proof of that. You know, I would say that my ability to restrain certain types of food is improving in a different way than previous ways that I've tried. I think in the past I've been like, no, that's just not good. Like, you can't have that. And I think now what I feel is, you know, there are times when I have an internal sense of like what feels like a little bit too much and what feels like it's okay. And as I said, at times I am excessive, but at other times I'll pull back. And I think what I'm saying about this is that conventional advice makes it sound all very clear and simple. Do that, do this, and life will turn out perfectly the way you want it to. My experience has been that does work for some very talented few who have that degree of control over their brains. What I feel is that you can always have some kind of control over your brain if you engage yourself honestly, and if you surround yourself with loving people who understand that if you mess up or if you do something, that there's a way in which people can gently redirect each other. I think having a supportive community is particularly important. And, you know, having, you know, a trainer or a dietitian or someone like you to turn to and say, hey, Abel, like, you know, how do I eat as much bacon as I want and not get fat? Or how do I eat the kind of diet, you know, like I think when you trust someone's intrinsic sensibility about something, it matters a lot.
Yeah. Now, the drinking part, you mentioned something that a lot of people ask about, which is, how can I drink and live this way or whatever? And you brought up a point. One of the reasons that I drink, I think partially is because I was paid in booze for so long as a musician, and I realized its power to change your brain, to change the way that your brain operates for a brief period of time, such that maybe you can express yourself in a different way. It kind of recalibrates the way that you're operating. I find that, especially being, you know, the overachiever type A, as I'm sure you are as well, sometimes you get really sick of yourself. Sometimes it's annoying to practice so much moderation, to be so well behaved, to achieve so much or whatever. You just want to turn that down a little bit. What is it about drinking or other things that can kind of interrupt that pattern that can actually help heal or help your overall lifestyle so that you are living a fulfilling life?
Well, so firstly, I think from a database perspective, I think there's a decent amount of evidence to show that a certain amount of red wine, a certain amount of beer can be cardioprotective. So that, I think that in itself can be helpful. I think from a brain perspective, I think sometimes we're so tightly wound up that the frontal cortex is exerting too much control over our lives. And as a result of that, the opposite of what we want is happening. And I think that alcohol can create a state of disinhibition that can help you let go, so your creative juices start flowing and you start feeling a bit more in touch with parts of yourself that you haven't been in touch with before. Or it's just simply a way of relaxing that and also socializing. I think, as I said earlier, a huge part of this is identity and I think self-acceptance. And I think that when alcohol promotes that, then it's working really well. I think when it starts to negate that, then you need to sort of start to think about, well, you know, am I using this against myself or am I using it for myself? And that, I think, is just a simple question you ask yourself. Is this working for me or against me? And how can I make this work for me? But I think the basic answer to what you're saying is that I think the disinhibition does allow for the creative juices to flow. It deactivates the frontal cortex. And as a result, you can actually feel more relaxed and you can feel more creative because all these different connections are happening.
So I think what you're saying is meditate during the week, martinis on the weekends. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think you have to figure out the pattern that works for you. I'm in general I'm also a musician, so I sort of share a lot. I think the fact that we like music and neuroscience and bacon puts us in a particular category. I think it's a patterned existence is not for me. I think what I prefer is to be goal-oriented and to make sure that I get stuff done that needs to be done. And if I start lagging, then I change my lifestyle because the goals matter to me. And if I'm on target, then it gives me permission to play, and I can play even more.
I love it. So we're just about out of time, but I know you're working on a lot of different things recently. You have a number of great books. Would you mind telling people who are listening where they can find you and what you're working on next?
Sure. So my website is drsrinipillay.com. It's DRSRINIPILLAY.com. And as I told you, I'm rebranding, so my whole look is likely to, the way I present myself is likely to change. But I think the message would be the same. In terms of things that I would love people to engage with, I have a small ebook called Total Brain Makeover that gives people just a 10-minute brain exercise every week to change one thing in your life. And then I have a more extensive package, if that's something that sounds like it's interesting, called the Untapped Power of You. And I think you have the link of that on the blog. That I think if people really want to change their brains and they're really committed to doing something, I think that that's a pretty intensive guide on how to go about doing that.
Awesome. So if you're looking for that, go to fatburningman.com and just type in Dr. Srini Pillay into the search bar. Dr. Srini, thank you so much for coming. What a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abel. It's always great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fat Burning Man. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the podcast app, or wherever else you might be listening to or watching this show. Got a second? Please leave me a quick review on iTunes. I always love hearing from you, and if you think someone else might like and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or with a family member. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at FatBurnMan and Facebook by typing in Abel James or Fat Burning Man. Drop me a line anytime. Did you know that I've recorded over 150 episodes of Fat Burning Man, winning 4 awards in independent media and hitting #1 in more than 8 countries? And here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode for free. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes in video and audio versions for all the past episodes of Fat Burning Man. Better yet, enter your best email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a Quickstart guide to start burning fat right now and a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free fat burning download straight to your inbox, and make sure that you never miss a show again. This is Abel James signing off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
And all sorts of stuff you can do, but at the most part, it's like, I'm just constantly figuring out the more information you have, the healthier and better you can be. And since I spent so many years so sick and miserable and just so bloated and fat, I'm into it,